that we might not be able to just give out the physical value, but the components play a very important role in terms of keeping this planet integrated. However, we try to start building production cycles or we start getting onto the technology factors, that's not going to sustain in the long run because we are going to lose out, we are going to come down in terms of the carrying capacity. The non-renewable resources are continuously used up for the production process. Yes, because the production process is on, we are using all the non-renewable resources. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Chapter 4, Unit 2, second semester B.B.A, Sustainable Development, where we are going to speak about limits to growth model. Now, what is this limits to the growth model all about? In the year 1968, a group of about 75% belonging to different strata of the society. When I say different strata, the word strata means belonging to different levels or class of the society from around the world, founded a club called as the Club of Rome. Now, this club is not something to do with entertainment, but this is a club that was being found out to understand about the developmental economics. So what did they do? They believed that the possibilities of continuous growth have been exhausted, and then the timely action is essential in order to avoid the planetary collapse. Now, let me just come back to this for a moment. We believe that growth is a continuous process, but that is not true. Why? Because in economics or in daily walk of life, growth has got certain limits. Growth has got certain barriers. Now, if you try to extend the growth function beyond a point, it leads to collapse. It leads to a complete smash down. Why? Because growth itself would become a malfunction there. So that's why what happened here is that we wanted to understand the possibility of continuous growth. So when I talk about that continuous growth factor in business or in economics, I want to see that we are making progress, might be step by step, a little, one by one, but nevertheless, we are trying to make a progress. So that's what our intention was altogether in terms of understanding the business. So what we did is that we started choosing initial theme, we in the sense the people, and that was called as the Predicament of Mankind in June 1970. So about 50 years back, we started this club, and where we wanted to understand about the prediction of mankind, what's going to be the future of mankind. And it commissioned by 4 MIT scientists led by Donald Meadows, who published by the Club of Rome and the Limits of Growth in the year 1972. So in the year 1972, there was a publication which was done, The Limits to Growth. The second report, entitled as Beyond the Limits, was published in the year 1992, quite a gap of 20 years, which gave fresh evidences of how mankind has crossed the limits. Now, there is something that we need to understand as called as shortcomings. Now, we all believe that nothing is impossible. Probably that tagline is very good for a shoe company named Adidas, but it is not good for the mankind. Why? Because there are many things which are not possible for the mankind, for the human beings. There are limitations, and unfortunately, we don't want to accept that limitations. We believe that Earth has got an endless function of growth. Earth would continue to remain as it was hundreds and thousands of years back. But the truth remains in each one of our mind that we need to accept is that Earth has started depleting. The growth has started coming down. Probably, eventually, we might have to exit from this planet. Now, what is the truth behind this story is that once you start understanding the theory of depletion, you start understanding why the resources are being depleting over the night altogether, day by day, you would start appreciating the factor that we have gone behind the limits. We have gone beyond the limits in terms of utilizing it, and we have destroyed several natural resources. Now, this cannot be rebuilt as what we are thinking. This cannot be again reconstructed as the earth was thousands of years back. So what is now coming into picture is that mankind has crossed the limits. Human beings have crossed the limits and they have now started the path of self-destruction. Now the model, it was Forster of the MIT. You can see the person here, the great person, who in his book of World Dynamics published in 1971 devised a very, very important model that investigates the interplay of highly aggregated variables as the world population, industrial world production, food supply, pollution, and natural resources still remaining in the world. Now, this is quite complicated. Let me now tell you from an environmental economic standpoint. There are many variables which are highly interconnected. We are not able to segregate them, put a monetary value to them or a standby value to them and tell that this is exactly the impact factor. Why? Because these variables are so interconnected, so intrigued in nature that we might not be able to just give out the physical value. But the components play a very important role in terms of keeping this planet integrated. So what I'm trying to come here across is that if you look into factors like population, industrial development, food supply, pollution, and different factors, these are those dynamics which are actually playing in this world, which is making this Mother Earth completely come into a standby position. Now, what is happening here is that when you try to adopt the system dynamics philosophy given by J. Forster, the authors of Limits of Growth constructed an elaborate computer model using it. So they started putting it into a regression equation altogether, and they started understanding that how this model could be interpreted in terms of the global growth, in terms of the divisible factors altogether. So what was the model? They presented a large and a new type of model designed to predict the future development, 5 global interrelated variables, starting with population, food production, industrial production, non-renewable resources, we have been speaking about it, and pollution, not to forget. The model is based on the thesis that the continued growth leads to infinite quantities just to do the not to fit into a finite world. Quite a complicated statement. Let me make it very, very simple for you. Now, after taking 5 variables, namely from population to pollution, what they were able to come in is that though the world is continuously churning out large chunk of products and services of various parameters, various kind, various systems altogether, but what is happening is that it leads to infinite quantities that just do not fit into a finite world. So what you're trying to do is that you're pushing it beyond the limits of production. You've gone beyond the limits. So once you've gone beyond the limits of production and you're trying to push the world to a new level altogether, that is the starting, that is the benchmark of destruction that you have landed upon. Now, on a long-term period, what is going to happen is that you don't have to find paths of destruction, but the destruction is welcomed by the mankind itself. Now, when we were speaking about the COVID-19 2 years back, what was the scenario at that point of time is that probably we were panicked by the factor that this is going to be the end of the world. But slowly we started realizing that the virus could also be controlled when we start controlling ourselves from coming outside, from maintaining distance, from using a sanitizer, or probably getting into more regular habits altogether, not from overcrowding and so many other factors. Now, what is happening is that the nature is trying to teach us in different ways and methods how to regenerate yourself, how to survive, how to sustain, how to live a life, a quality life altogether. But it is the human beings who want to push the limits, see the fury of nature in different factors, and then come back and complain saying that nature is not cooperating. Nature has never ever been against the mankind. Nature has always been cooperative enough in accommodating all these steps taken up by mankind. On all this factor on and above, what I would like to say here is that we are still doing things which are not fit for this world to sustain. We are still creating pollution. We are still overpopulating the spaces in the name of industrial production. We are destroying resources. We are just wasting the non-renewable resources, but still we have not understood that you are trying to dig your own grave in different methods. Moving further, the model also talks about the factor called as the basic idea, which is elaborated in a highly complicated model, is that it cannot be easily described in an equation form, no doubt about it. This is because the relationship between those 5 variables are not rectilinear, which means they are not just on one straight line where I can just put A is equal to B. Probably this is a little bit complicated for all of us to understand. Now, coming back, multipliers in this question depend on the levels of variable, no doubt about it. Among the various relationships, there are feedback loops that register the effects of changes in one variable, such as food production, on other variable like the population growth. Now, there are factors. Why? Because when I'm going to talk about population and food growth, and this is something which is quite normal. As the population kept on increasing in this world, the need for food also started going up. So over a period of time, it is quite evident for each one of us to understand that for the sake of food, for the sake of shelter, for the sake of clothing, the population, when it started increasing, we started depleting all the natural resources that was available. So over a period of time, what has happened is that we have just gone on in the position of depletion. We have just gone in the way of destruction. And today, when you put back those models in the equation, start interpreting it, start analyzing it, you will be surprised to find that, is that what we have been trying to do? Is this what we are actually landing up to? But nevertheless, that's what the model has been trying to say to us. Followed by, for example, when we talk about the population growth is positively related to food production, but food production is negatively related to pollution, and pollution in turn is positively related to industrial output. So when I talk about those 5 variables in a rectilinear equation, as I'm trying to put it across, there are these variables which are not directly equated. Now, for example, as it is told here, population and food production are equated because you know that factor. But food production has got nothing to do with pollution. But pollution has got something to do with industrial. So somewhere down the lane, the link is in many formats. The formats is getting interlinked. The conceptual growth is on a different factor. The model also uses past data on factors like growth rate of population, industrial output, agricultural production, estimates of rates of technological progress. Yes, that's always there coming into picture. These factors would lead to the use of new resources, raise in terms of the productivity and control the production. Now, this is very, very important for each one of us to understand. Why? Because we will try to understand this factor that as we are making progress, both in terms of technology, in terms of production, in terms of growth, there are certain factors, there are certain important things inside the equation which will equate and tell you that at some point of time, the limits to the growth theory is coming into reality. Followed by assumptions of the model. We have certain assumptions which you need to understand. First one is the population increase. These are highly non-linear. So that means I'm going to talk about the difference in the birth rate and the death rate. It is influenced by crowding, the food intake, pollution. A rise in any of the factors will definitely drive to the birth rate downwards. Why? Because one side, when man is inventing a lot of medicines for survival, but the other side, since the pollution and the environment is completely on a negative state, that would lead to a higher death rate, which means even though the birth rate goes up at some point of time, you would start seeing that it's getting balanced and we are coming down. The death rate decreases with increasing food intake and material of standard living. As we start inventing new and new medicines, the death rate would come down, which means the population would continue to tick upwards. Followed by the assumptions of the model will also come into the factor. The second one is material of standard of living, when we talk about the capital, the relative size of the population, the productivity, and all those factors. Why? Because if the level of capital, that's the money function availability, is higher, and you are able to see that there is some kind of growth, there is some kind of process, there is some kind of functionality altogether that is happening, then automatically it is possible for all of us to see that the standard of living will also go up, and the standard of living will also start building up altogether. Followed by the non-renewable resources are continuously used up for the production process. Yes, because the production process is on, we are using all the non-renewable resources, more capital is churned out every day, the production is going up higher. So at some point of time, there's a depletion of the resources, depletion of capital, but yet we believe that that's how the survival is going to be. And what we are seeing is that the productivity of the finished goods is going to come down, because as you start depleting the resources, probably at the end of the day, you might not have sufficient to come to the finished product stage level. Followed by the fourth assumption, we are talking about agriculture production depends on land capital investment. Yeah, that's very, very important. Land can be developed or eroded depending on the independent or investment decision. Yield per unit of land is increased by capital. Brilliant. Yes, that is happening, but with diminishing returns, no doubt about it. That's also coming into picture. Now, what is happening is that offline, over the time period, you will start understanding that this is coming down at a very, very great rapid speed altogether. So this is going to be quite dangerous when we are trying to understand it. Followed by this factor that the agricultural nomination itself, why is it coming down? Why is it going to take a dip? Is that it is not just that people are not interested in agriculture, but by the fact that land, which is the most important source, is getting depleted, it's getting eroded. The availability of raw materials are coming down. So somewhere down the lane, this might not sound a great success to us. Followed by pollution is generated by the production process, gradually absorbed into the harmless form of environment. High accumulation of pollution, yes, that's coming in. Lower absorption capacity, very much yes. And the nature of the environment, that's also coming into picture, which is going to be a very big factor altogether. Followed by the model shows the 4 possible modes of growing population that can exhibit over a period of time. The mode actually observed in any specific case will depend on the characteristics of the carrying capacity, so no doubts about it. There are levels of population that could be sustained by a definitely that of the prevailing and physical biological systems on the nature of growth and process that is felt. So at some point of time, you would suddenly start feeling that the process that we are getting involved with, the levels at which we are getting involved with, is primarily because of the physical and biological relationship that we are depending, and the nature of process of growth itself is completely combined in the hands of the Mother Earth altogether. So however we try to start building production cycles, or we start getting onto the technology factors, that's not going to sustain in the long run, because we are going to lose out, we are going to come down in terms of the carrying capacity. And then when we see this, for example, a population growing in a limited environment can approach the ultimate carrying capacity of the environment in several possible ways. So lesser the population, more the benefits that you can derive out of the environment. Followed by, it can adjust smoothly to the equilibrium given in the environmental limit. That means when you are going to play well within the limits of the environment, the system gets very much balanced. The ecosystem is so very well inbuilt that you don't have to worry about the growth structure and dynamics. So this can just continue like that. So nevertheless, when I'm talking about this word called as population, we need to have a check on that, so that we don't go and exceed, we don't go and just burst out the bubble of population completely, which would again lead into the path of destruction. Now, the criticisms about this factor, like any other model, this model also has got certain criticisms, the do's and don'ts factors altogether. The limits of the growth was alarming report predicting the collapse of the world economy in 21st century. That's a criticism. Of course, though it had been sold in tens of millions of copies in 30 languages and was considerable impact on economic and political thinking, it provided an impetus to the anti-growth sentiment. So it was against the growth sentiment altogether. In fact, the world community was divided into two groups, that is the resource pessimist and the resource optimist. Now, this book led to the division of two people, one on the optimist side, one on the pessimist side altogether. So, nevertheless, these were the factors, that criticism that was happening. One side, it led to an anti-growth model in the mind. The other side, there were people who still believe that yes, growth is possible. 21st century will lead to a new dawn of production altogether. With that, I come to the end of this session. I hope and believe that all the factors that have been presented through this session will be of a great use to you, both in terms of theory as well as in the practical walk of life. In the upcoming sessions, we are going to talk more about the different factors of environmental economics. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.